We can lose perspective of God's timeline as we read through Scripture. We can move ahead 100 years at the turn of a page, but at the time, people were making decisions for and against God day by day. This is a quick view of the last 154 years of God's ancient people. Judah and Israel warred against each other, and sometimes accepted and often rejected the God who brought them there. The house of Israel was like a crippled minnow fighting against itself as it swam in a sea of sharks. The northern kingdom of Israel formed an allegiance with Syria, who for a time was a big fish in the sea of sharks. Together they warred against the southern kingdom of Judah. Their goal? To take the prize of Jerusalem, the holy city. Judah does some political maneuvering and begins swimming with the sharks. They continue an allegiance with Egypt, the shark to the west, but don't stop there. The temple is emptied of its gold and used as bait to forge a second alliance with the growing shark to the east, Assyria. In time, the evil king Hoshea of Israel attempts a double cross. He grows tired of paying off Assyria to leave them alone, so he begins a secret alliance with Egypt. Confident in their new support, Israel stops paying tribute to Assyria. It was a huge mistake. The shark, Assyria, devours Syria, the big fish, and has the minnow of Israel for dessert. With Assyria on their doorstep, Judah's king Hezekiah turns to the Lord, and God intervenes. However, in time, when Judah again drifts away from God, they are laid waste between the two fighting sharks of Egypt and Assyria. And in time, the new top shark, Babylon, finishes them off.
And it's to point out that when this stuff is going on that we read about, life was every bit as complicated as it is for us today. And to trust in a God principle was every bit as, quote, risky, every bit as inconvenient, every bit of facing gray areas as you and I face today. We could pull out a million different, very important issues. But this morning, I just want to hit on two things, just two main points of focus. And basically, it's an anatomy lesson, if you will. Not in biology, but in life. One is the anatomy of a fall. What does it look like for people to fall from God? What are the signs? What are the elements that contribute? How do you know a fall is underway? And the other is the anatomy of deliverance. When can you expect God to be lifting you out of a situation? What things need to be going on? What are the signs there? What's going on in this? And that's, as we look at these two nations, they should be one, but they're two. Judah in the south, Israel in the north. We'll start with the fall. And we're going to start with the last king of Israel, the northern kingdom. His name is Hoshea, not to be confused with Hosea, prophet. What Israel is a classic study in this is how to fall. How to fall. They'll show you from their example the signs. They'll show you the way. They'll show you what it looks like. This is what it is to fall away from God. But even if you call yourself God's people, so as God's people, how do you avoid it? How do I avoid it? Well, let's just take a look at a few things from this kingdom of Israel and see what led to their fall. And start there. Israel, for one thing, was proud and comfortable at this time. There wasn't a great famine going on. There was a fair amount of food in the land. They were doing okay. And they were comfortable. Well, that's not so bad. We all want to be comfortable. Yep, but there's a problem in human nature when we get comfortable. It's a funny thing, but we tend to depend less on God, not more, when we get comfortable. Usually, if we're going to get close to God, it's when we're kind of getting squeezed. Is that saying then we all want to get squeezed? Well, not necessarily, but we want to be on our guard when we're getting too comfortable, because they were. And the thing about this is that we see it all through our own history. We don't have to be an ancient Jewish nation. We see it in our own Western history. It's not bad to learn from other people. It's not bad to put some faith and trust and learn from other parts and discoveries of humanity. That's not a bad thing. What gets to be a bad thing is when human thought becomes the source of our enlightenment. Then we run into what I might call as the Romans 1:25 phenomenon. The Romans 1:25 phenomenon. Well, what exactly am I talking about? Well, to use the words of that passage itself, we begin to exchange the truth of God for a lie. We do an exchange. Truth of God for a lie. And we begin to serve the creature rather than the Creator. What's that kind of look like? Well, in cultures that do that, the norm tends to be, for one thing, is what's bad is good and what's good is bad. It becomes the in thing, it becomes cool to be wicked, and it becomes very naive and old-fashioned to try and do things right or righteously. And the society as a mentality tends to get self-focused, self-absorbed. It's all about me. How I can have better life for me. And since it's all about me, then it also becomes all about my appetites. Don't tell me I can't have something. Don't tell me if it feels good that I can't do it. Carpe diem, man, to the max. Just seize the day. It's mine. It's said that the root of all sin is self. Becomes very true. This is the way a society that is going the Israel way tends to be. Sound uncomfortably familiar? Israel seemed to be doing just fine on its own. And they felt, that old-fashioned stuff kind of had to go. My ancestors, the legacy from them, they tell me that in that day the tabernacle was filled with God's glory. I don't know, haven't seen it, a myth to me. And God did something that God still does today. Learn this lesson. When God is no longer invited, His first move isn't to kick you in the head. It's to quietly withdraw. If you read back, it's one of the saddest things that I see, and you almost miss it if you read through some of the Chronicles and Kings. You read God's glory filled the temple and everybody had to get out. It was so fantastic. And then all of a sudden it's never mentioned anymore. There's no more of this glory. Just a quiet withdrawal. And more of an exchange of God for the lie. Just more and more of that going on. God quietly withdraws. And that's where we find ourselves when we give into our own comfort. What else did Israel do? Well, their natural response to troubles, for trials, when those gray areas were showing up, was to do the practical thing. Quote, unquote. Ever do the practical thing? This whole thing of Christianity and loving and all of this is very great ideals, and it sounds great on paper, but when life gets down and dirty, you know what? You got to do the practical thing. Trouble is, if we take Israel for an example, sometimes the practical thing isn't all that practical. I know my neighbor's going to try and stab me in the back, so the practical thing, Ron, is let's stab him first. Let's just get real about this. But sometimes the practical isn't practical. Because we already looked at this as that if you do an evil thing to an evil people, there can only be one outcome. Evil. You reap what you sow. Evil has this way of backlashing. It seemed like the practical thing to do, but the ultimate outcome turns out not to be so good. This isn't what I wanted. How many people find themselves saying that? In their marriages, I didn't sign up for this. When we got married, I didn't want this. People in life. I didn't want to be here. Well, what path brought you there? We do reap what we sow. Israel, double cross, and two great evils. One, of course, it was deceptive. There was no honor in what they were doing. But the second great evil was even worse. And the second great evil that they did was simply this. They trusted to something else other than God. It was Egypt who was going to see them face Assyria. It was other people. It was something other than God that was going to get them through. And we find that Egypt really wasn't such a great ally after all, because they didn't want to have to face another superpower if they could avoid it. So they just watched those people burn. Trusting to something else other than God is the primary thing. Something that's dangerous for all of us. We face something. What is the first thing we trust? I'm not meaning we have to get foolish and we do foolish things. But I do ask, what is the primary trust we have to see us through trials? If you do not sow honor, there will be no honor in the outcome. If you do not sow God, there will be no God in the outcome. Practical is what ultimately happens. What else is in this fall with Israel? Well, here's a good one. Israel grew irritated at any message from God. Israel grew irritated with any message from God. At the time this was going on, a great prophet made an indictment against them. Nehemiah 9:26 says this, "Nevertheless, they were disobedient and rebelled against you, God. They cast your law behind their backs." Okay, we got that so far, but here it comes. "And killed your prophets who testified against them to turn themselves to yourself and worked great provocations." They killed your prophets. Just throw that out. We can understand that they didn't want to listen, but why did they kill the prophets? It's our tendency, isn't it? Defensive, irritated when we don't want to hear what we need to hear. And you know what? For me, it was just brought me back to the past and on my own life. Same tendency. Remember back in college, because really, when we follow God, it's not a straight line. I'm yet to meet anybody. Maybe there's someone out there who accepted Christ and their life was uphill from there, that they never failed Him, or they just grew steadily. Mine was more like this. I went up for a while and then a big turn around this way and a big turn, and then climb a little more. And that's the way my life. And during one of these detours back in college days, I was going to a great church. But I got busy. I didn't stop believing in God. I just got busy. And so I didn't go for a week, 2, 3. And you know how that turns out. Then 3 becomes 4, and 4 becomes 5. Hadn't been there for a while. Hadn't been there. But I still believe in God. I was just busy. Get another word for that. Drifting from the Lord. Drifting. So there I was. But thankfully, God does chase after us. And He does call us back. It's hard work running from God. So, but I come back, and during one of the first meetings, had some nice friends there, and said, in a very nice way, "Glad to see you again. Glad you're back here." And you know what my response was? I wasn't going that long. Defensive. Boom. The walls went up. I got irritated. Don't tell me I've been wrong. That's irritating. I get irritated. And they just try to be, no, I understand you weren't that long, but we're just glad to see you. No way, the walls are staying up. Irritated. That's kind of the way we are. You don't want to kill the messenger. Want the messenger to go away. But what's even worse is that we want to go away. That we want to go away. Let me tell you this, that one of the most clear danger signals to any of us is when our overriding impulse is to remove ourselves from God's company. And that means physically God's people, God's influence, wherever it may be. One of the sure danger signs, I'm just tired, I just want a break. Or you come up with whatever way you want to rationalize. But whenever we want to remove ourselves from God's company, it is a very, very dangerous sign. Watch out. Watch out. That's what Israel was doing. Prophets, you're irritating me. I'm going to kill the message. And that's what they did. And they went on a very, very slippery slope. What else? Well, Israel enjoyed God's long patience, but then suffered his quick judgment. Long patience, quick judgment. It's amazing, even in that passage, just kind of reading between the lines a little bit. Here they are, some 200 years this stuff is going on. And it's going on and things are getting worse and worse in the culture. But they're left to do their own thing. And finally pull this double cross. And it's like, there it is. There's the last straw. God saying, believe in me, trust in me, believe in me. And they say, nah, we're going to believe in Egypt and we're going to do it this way. Instantly, when they did this judgment, and it came in the form of another evil people. It wasn't like God sent angels and at least it's a righteous person beating me. No, he just sent someone more evil than yourself. And there they are, just ravaging the land for 3 years, and then whoever's left alive they take out. It was really ugly, and it was really fast. Something to think about even in our own nation, isn't it? 200 years? See a parallel in the timeline? Do we not feel, even in our nation, that we just couldn't even conceive of something happening like that to us? Well, maybe we should. Maybe we should. Well, that's the anatomy of a fall. What does deliverance look like? What comes in play in this deliverance from God? Well, let's kind of look into that a little bit. We already kind of looked at the history side of this. Here it was, the Assyrian Empire. And if you read between the lines a little bit, you might have noticed there must have been a time, a temperature of descent kind of started rising throughout the empire. Babylon, who wasn't yet the big shark, started to rebel. We're not paying anymore. And Syria, we're not paying anymore. And then the minnow, Israel, so probably was like this, the descent goes, and the big guys go, we're not paying anymore. And then Israel, we're not paying anymore either. And there they are, nobody's paying. If you were a superpower and all this descent started coming up, what would you do? Especially if you were evil. You'd go out there and you'd crush those little puppies. Enough of that. And that's exactly what happened. An explosion of military action from Assyria. And the bull, it's a feeding frenzy. The shark is out there. It just eats Syria. And it eats Babylon. And while it's going, let's just have a little hors d'oeuvre here in Israel. And there they are. They just roll. And here's this military inflammation. And you happen to be Judah now. Little tiny nation. Not even as big as Israel. And there they are, sitting on your border. Right there. On the doorsteps of your capital city, calling for your surrender. What do you do? Well, think of it maybe in terms, think of America, say some big coalition got together and decided they had enough of us. And you wake up one morning and the news you find out is that everything to the west of us has been destroyed. And to the east, everything has been conquered. And you find out that there's a great big force sitting right on the Ohio-Indiana border. All that's left is Indiana. And these people say, that's it. Here it is. You surrender, and we'll treat you half decent. But if you don't, it's going to get really, really ugly. And you think, maybe I better surrender. But here's the thing, is that they're also saying, here's the terms of surrender, is that one is your identity is done. Eventually we're going to move you to some far off country. They don't even speak your language. You'll have to learn a new language. Your identity, don't ever use the word American again. And worst of all, they'll say, the God you believe in, that's it. Recant. You never mention the Christian God again. That faith is done with. You're going to convert to this whatever other religion, and that's it. What do? You're forced to respond. You're either going to trust to God, this God that you say you believe in is real or is not, or you're going to recant. You're going to go one way or the other. What are you going to do? Well, in effect, this is where King Hezekiah of Judah was. This is where he was. And here is his response in that situation. It's in 2 Kings 19. Well, we could spend time and we could go, it's amazing how deeply, because this was real life, we could go into the history of things, of the interrelations of these nations and these kings and all of this. Complicated stuff. You know why? Because life is complicated. Complicated situations, a big mess. You know why? Because life can be a big, complicated mess. So in this little bit of time, just this superficial look at that vignette, what can we take that's simple enough we can go from here and live it? That it is something that makes a difference and simple enough to remember. Well, let me just throw a few things out your way and we'll be done. Simple truth. Simple truth. If you walk away from God, you will face the consequences without God. Walk away from God, face it without God. Simple truth. We don't simply make a decision for Christ. We are making decisions all the time. All the time. Simple truth. No one needs to be taken by surprise. You don't have to wake up one morning and go, oh my goodness, I chose the wrong path. Because the signs are there, clear to be seen if you will look. Which path? Which path? A Judah path or an Israel path? Simple truth. Your relationship with Christ is way bigger than you are. Your personal relationship is way bigger than you are. Well, what does that mean exactly? It means this, that it isn't just you and Jesus. Yeah, personal side, sure. But it isn't. It's you and Jesus in the context of your church family. It's you and Jesus in the context of your community. It's you and Jesus in context of the culture in which you live. What's the implication there? It's this, is that you can be just like stellar, you and Jesus are great buds, but if your culture is going down the toilet spiritually, you will suffer the effects as well. That will become part of your Christian experience. Because it's bigger than just you and Jesus. It's all of us. You and Jesus can be best buds. But if your church is stale and unhealthy, that will be part of your Christian experience. Implication. We aren't called to just have this one-on-one. It's a collective experience too. And we are accountable. If the culture is going down the toilet, we play a part in that. If your church is going stale, you play a part in that. Because it will be part of your experience. It's bigger than you and I are. Simple truth. Israel walked away and died. Judah followed and experienced the promise. Question. Is your culture more like Judah or Israel? Question. What should you be doing? Question. What are you doing? Final statement to take and chew on. The church, your church, has no walls. The church